He feels it before you do. Not when you leave, not when you stop answering, but much earlier, in a place you cannot see. While you are still explaining, still hoping, still trying to hold the emotional thread together, something inside him has already begun to loosen. Men experience emotional detachment differently, and this difference is rarely talked about. You think distance starts when communication breaks. For him, it begins when control slips. At first, nothing looks dramatic. He is still there, still present, still saying the right words. But internally, a subtle shift has already happened. The unconscious has noticed the imbalance. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is exactly where his loss begins, unconsciously. You detach consciously. He detaches instinctively. A man does not feel loss when the bond weakens. He feels it when his sense of emotional dominance is threatened. When you stop chasing explanations. When you stop needing reassurance. When your energy no longer revolves around his reactions. That is the moment his nervous system reacts, not with sadness, but with disturbance. And this is where the paradox appears. He feels the loss before you do, because he senses the shift before you name it. You are still emotionally invested, still giving meaning to silence, still believing something can be repaired. He, on the other hand, begins to feel a quiet unease. Not grief, not regret, something deeper, a destabilization of identity. Because in Jung's view, a man's ego is tightly linked to his role, the role of being needed, chosen, emotionally central. When that role weakens, even slightly, the psyche reacts. That is why men often pull away before you emotionally detach. Not because they don't care, but because they feel something slipping that they cannot yet articulate. The unconscious registers danger long before the mind admits loss. You detach as a result of pain. He detaches as a defense against future pain. And here is the crucial detail most women miss. By the time you feel the loss, he has already feared it. This fear does not look like vulnerability. It looks like distance, coldness, distraction, rationalization. But underneath it is the shadow at work, the part Jung described as everything we refuse to consciously face. Dependency, attachment, emotional reliance. So while you are still emotionally present, he is already preparing for absence. And that is why, later, when you finally step back, when you finally detach for real, the shock hits him harder than it hits you. Because you are leaving something you already grieved. He is losing something he only just realized mattered. This difference changes everything. This is why the timeline feels reversed. You grieve openly. He grieves silently. You feel everything at once. He feels it in delayed fragments. When a woman begins to emotionally detach, she knows it. Her body knows. Her sleep changes. Her thoughts slow down around him. She stops reaching, not as a strategy, but as a symptom. Detachment for you is a conscious reckoning. The moment when pain becomes heavier than hope. For him, it happens underground. Long before you stop caring. He senses that your emotional availability is no longer guaranteed. And this is not a romantic realization. It is existential. In Jung's view, when a man's anima, the inner feminine through which he experiences emotional connection, feels threatened, the psyche reacts with anxiety, not tenderness. So he doesn't say, "I'm afraid of losing you." He thinks, "I need space." He mistakes fear for independence. This is why men often appear calm, even detached, right before the real loss. Their system is already rehearsing separation. Emotional distancing feels like control to him, like regaining balance, like safety. But what he doesn't realize is that he is numbing himself before the wound arrives. You, meanwhile, are still present, still emotionally engaged, still interpreting his distance as confusion or stress. You assume you are behind him emotionally, when in reality, you are ahead, because you are still connected, and he is already protecting himself from connection. This is the quiet tragedy of emotional mismatch. He begins the internal goodbye long before the relationship ends, without understanding that this premature detachment is exactly what causes the loss he fears. Jung warned that what we repress does not disappear, it returns with force. And this is where the reversal happens. When you finally detach, truly detach, you do it with clarity. You've processed the pain. You've accepted the truth. You are no longer negotiating with hope. Your nervous system exhales. That is when his repressed emotions surface. Suddenly, the silence feels loud. Your absence feels heavy. Your calm feels threatening. What he avoided feeling at the beginning now arrives all at once. Not as sadness, but as disorientation. A loss of reference. A destabilization of identity. Because the woman he emotionally prepared to lose has now actually left, and the defenses no longer work. This is why men often reach out after you've let go. Not because they changed their mind, but because the delayed grief has finally caught up. You didn't leave suddenly. He just arrived emotionally too late. What makes this even more painful is that when his loss finally arrives, you no longer recognize it as love. By the time he starts feeling the emptiness, you have already crossed an internal threshold. You are no longer asking why. You are no longer trying to fix the dynamic. You are no longer emotionally available in the same way. And this is what confuses him the most. Because in his mind, the loss is happening now. In yours, it already happened then. Men often believe they are strong because they can suppress emotion. But suppression is not strength, it is postponement. Jung described this as the psyche storing unprocessed emotion in the shadow, where it waits for the right moment to emerge. And when it does not ask permission. That moment is your detachment. Your calm is what activates his pain. Your silence is what destabilizes him. Your absence is what makes the loss real. Not because you became distant, but because you became whole again. This is why he suddenly starts remembering details he once ignored. Your voice, your patience, your emotional consistency. Things he took for granted when you were still there. Loss sharpens perception. But perception comes too late when connection is no longer accessible. You detach by turning inward. He feels lost by turning backward. And here lies the deepest misunderstanding between men and women. You don't leave to be missed. You leave because staying hurts too much. He misses because he assumed you would always stay. This is why his pain often looks chaotic. He doesn't feel it cleanly. He feels it in waves. Nostalgia one day, indifference the next, longing followed by pride. The psyche oscillates because it has no emotional closure. He never processed the loss when it was happening. You did. And that difference is irreversible. When a woman emotionally detaches, she doesn't close a door loudly. She closes it quietly, internally, long before her behavior changes. By the time she looks distant, the decision has already been made. He only notices when it's too late. Jung said that people do not truly meet loss when something leaves. They meet it when the image they held collapses. And what collapses for him is not just the relationship, but the belief that your presence was guaranteed. This is why he feels the loss before you do, as fear, and why he feels it after you do, as grief. And between those two moments, everything changes. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when the power dynamic silently flips. Not when you argue, not when you cry, but when you stop mentally returning to him. For a long time, even while hurting, you kept him psychologically present. You replayed conversations. You imagined explanations. You held space for potential. That invisible tether kept the connection alive long after it stopped nourishing you. He felt that tether, and as long as it existed, he remained emotionally comfortable, even distant, even inconsistent, because somewhere, unconsciously, he sensed that you were still there. But when that tether dissolves, something primal happens. Jung believed that the psyche reacts most intensely not to events, but to shifts in meaning. And the meaning here is devastating for him. He is no longer central. That realization doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as restlessness, irritation, a strange urge to check, to test, to reinsert himself into your emotional field. Not because he suddenly understands love, but because the mirror that once reflected his importance has gone quiet. This is where many women misread his behavior. He may reach out casually, say something light, pretend nothing happened. He may even appear indifferent. But beneath that surface is a nervous system trying to regain equilibrium. Because your detachment didn't punish him, it destabilized him. You didn't withdraw to provoke. You withdrew to survive. And survival energy is unmistakable. It has weight, finality, a calm that doesn't ask to be understood. That calm is terrifying to someone who relied on your emotional availability as a constant. This is why men often feel the loss before you do as anxiety, and after you do as emptiness. The middle phase is denial. The belief that things can return to how they were, that your detachment is temporary, that your silence is negotiable. It isn't. You didn't harden. You integrated. Jung called this individuation, the moment a person stops orienting their inner world around another and becomes psychologically whole. When a woman reaches this point, she doesn't need distance to be powerful. Her presence alone carries a boundary, and that boundary is what he finally feels, not as rejection, but as irrelevance. This is why the loss hits him when you are already free, and why, by the time he understands what he lost, you no longer need him to understand it. What he loses is not just you. It is the version of himself that existed with you. This is the part that hurts the most, and the part he never anticipates. When a man feels the loss before you do, he believes he is preparing, bracing, protecting himself. But what he is actually doing is disconnecting from the emotional mirror that allowed him to feel grounded. You were not just a partner. You were a stabilizing reference point. And when that reference disappears, the psyche scrambles. Jung wrote that relationships often carry projections. We place parts of ourselves into the other without realizing it. For him, you carried his emotional continuity, his sense of being chosen, his quiet assurance that no matter how distant he became, something steady remained. When you detach, that projection collapses. This is why his loss feels confusing rather than clean. He doesn't just miss you. He misses how he felt about himself when you were there. The confidence, the emotional safety, the unspoken certainty that someone was holding space. You let go gradually. He loses suddenly. And this is where regret enters, not as love, but as awareness. Awareness that something essential slipped away while he was busy managing distance instead of presence. Awareness that your patience was not endless. Awareness that your emotional availability was not a permanent resource. But regret does not restore connection. It only highlights its absence. You, meanwhile, are not numb. You are integrated. You didn't detach to punish him. You detached because your psyche demanded coherence. Staying emotionally present in a dynamic that drained you would have meant abandoning yourself. And you chose not to. This choice is what makes his loss irreversible. Because when a woman leaves emotionally after understanding herself, she doesn't return to explain. She doesn't reopen wounds to validate someone else's awakening. She moves forward, not angrily, but quietly. That quiet is what echoes in him. He feels the loss before you do as fear. He feels it after you do as emptiness. And in between, he learns something too late. You were not leaving him. You were returning to yourself. What he struggles with next is not longing, it is disorientation. Because once you detach, the emotional rules he unconsciously relied on stop working. The familiar patterns collapse. The delayed replies no longer trigger anxiety in you. The silence no longer pulls you back. The emotional leverage he never admitted having simply dissolves. And this is deeply unsettling. Men are rarely taught to process loss internally. They are taught to endure it, override it, distract themselves from it. So when the loss finally becomes unavoidable, it doesn't arrive as sadness. It arrives as confusion, a vague sense that something is off, that life feels flatter, quieter, less responsive. Jung described this state as the ego losing contact with a vital projection. When the psyche can no longer locate a familiar emotional anchor, it feels untethered. And that is exactly what happens here. He may not miss you in words, but he misses the emotional gravity you created. Your detachment forces him to confront something uncomfortable, the realization that connection was not automatic, that it required presence, reciprocity, awareness, things he postponed because you carried them. This is why he often tries to re-enter casually, not with accountability, not with depth, but with familiarity. He reaches for the version of you that once accommodated him, the one who explained, the one who waited, the one who softened edges so he didn't have to grow. But that version no longer exists. And this is where the loss becomes real. Because he is not rejected, he is outgrown. Jung believed growth often feels like loss to those who remain psychologically still. When one person individuates and the other does not, the gap becomes impossible to bridge. Not because of cruelty, but because of timing. You didn't harden. You evolved. And evolution is irreversible. This is why his grief feels delayed, fragmented, and confusing. He is mourning something he never consciously valued until it was gone. You, on the other hand, are no longer mourning. You are living from alignment. That is the final asymmetry. He feels the loss as disconnection. You feel peace as coherence. And that difference marks the true end. There is a final layer to this loss that almost no one talks about. He doesn't just lose you. He loses the illusion that he had time. As long as you were emotionally present, even while hurting, the relationship felt unfinished, open-ended. Something he could return to later. Something he didn't have to fully choose now. This illusion of postponement is comforting to the male psyche. It creates safety without commitment. Your detachment destroys that illusion. Jung spoke of time as a psychological experience, not a clock. And psychologically, as long as you stayed emotionally available, time felt expandable for him. He believed, unconsciously, that the bond would wait. When you detach, time collapses. Suddenly, there is a before and an after, and no bridge between them. This is why his realization often feels sharp, almost shocking. He thought the distance was temporary, that you would circle back, that your patience was part of who you were, not something you were choosing. But patience is not identity. It is a decision. And when that decision ends, so does the illusion of infinite chances. This is why men often experience loss as a sudden event, even when the relationship has been eroding for months. He ignored the slow signals because they didn't threaten him immediately. But your detachment removes future access, and the psyche reacts violently to that. Not with love, with panic. You don't feel this panic because you already walked through the grief. You already accepted the truth. You already reclaimed yourself piece by piece. By the time you let go, there is no shock left, only clarity. This is the cruel asymmetry of emotional timing. He loses what he assumed would always be there. You release what was already gone. And that is why he feels the loss before you do as fear, and after you do as regret. Because by the time he understands the cost, the choice no longer belongs to him. What he finally confronts is something far more unsettling than heartbreak. He confronts his own delay. Men often believe that feeling later means feeling less. That postponing emotion gives them control. But emotional time does not work that way. Jung warned that what is postponed in the psyche accumulates pressure, and when it surfaces, it does so without mercy. This is why his loss doesn't feel poetic. It feels destabilizing. He begins to question moments he dismissed, conversations he minimized, warnings he intellectually understood but emotionally ignored. Not because he suddenly becomes reflective, but because the absence leaves no distraction. Your absence forces him inward. And for someone who relied on distance as a coping strategy, inward is the most uncomfortable place to be. Because there is no one left to absorb the emotional weight. No one smoothing the edges. No one translating silence into patience. You used to do that work. Quietly. Consistently. Now he must face the raw version of himself. The one without emotional cushioning. Jung would say this is the moment the shadow demands acknowledgement, not as guilt, but as truth. And here is the irony. This is often when he grows. But growth after loss is lonely, because transformation does not rewind time. It does not reopen doors that closed through self-respect. It does not resurrect versions of women who learn the cost of staying too long. You are not absent because you stopped caring. You are absent because you started caring about yourself more. And that truth cannot be negotiated. He may understand everything now, but understanding is not access. You detached when your soul required alignment. He feels the loss when his ego loses certainty. Two different timelines, two different awakenings, and only one of them leads forward. There is one final misunderstanding that keeps many women emotionally tied longer than necessary. You think that if he finally understands, the story might change. But understanding is not the same as readiness. By the time he feels the loss fully, his awareness arrives in a landscape that no longer includes you. Jung made a clear distinction between insight and integration. Insight is seeing the truth. Integration is becoming capable of living it. Most men reach insight after the relationship ends, and integration comes much later, often in solitude. You don't wait for integration. You detach when insight costs you too much. This is why his realization feels tragic. He understands what happened. He understands his patterns. He understands your value. But he understands it from a place of consequence, not presence. And consequence has no leverage. You, meanwhile, are not closing yourself off to love. You are closing yourself off to repetition. You no longer want to be the place where someone figures themselves out at your expense. You no longer want to be the emotional classroom. You want reciprocity, not realization. This is why when he looks back, the loss feels absolute. Not because you are unreachable, but because you are no longer available. Availability is not about access. It is about alignment. Jung said that real transformation requires sacrifice. Something must be left behind for something new to emerge. What he sacrifices too late is the version of you who would have stayed. What you sacrificed in time was the version of yourself who waited. That difference is everything. He feels the loss as a lesson. You feel peace as a result. And that is why, even if paths cross again, the dynamic never truly returns. Because you are no longer oriented around his timing. You are oriented around truth. And truth does not wait. And this is where the story truly ends. Not with drama, not with closure, but with maturity. You don't win because he finally understands. You don't heal because he finally feels it. You heal because you stop needing him to. This is the quiet power of emotional completion. When a woman finishes the story internally, the external chapters lose their grip. You no longer look back to measure loss. You no longer wait for regret to validate your worth. You move forward carrying something far more stable, self-recognition. Jung believed that the deepest transformation happens when we withdraw projections and reclaim the energy we gave away unconsciously. That is exactly what you did. You stopped outsourcing your emotional center. You stopped orbiting someone else's readiness. You came home to yourself. And from that place, everything looks different. His loss remains tied to the past, to what was. Your peace belongs to the present, to what is. That is why his emotions feel heavy and delayed, while yours feel grounded and calm. You are no longer living in reaction. You are living in alignment. And alignment does not argue. It does not prove. It simply is. He may carry the lesson forward. You carry your life forward. And this is the final truth most people never say out loud. When a man feels the loss before you do, it is fear. When he feels it after you do, it is grief. But when you stop feeling it at all, that is freedom. Not because you stopped loving, but because you finally chose yourself.